Well, this was the most unexpected expected result in the world, and I know that makes no sense whatsoever. But Tottenham losing at home to, it seems like relegation fodder at this point, Leicester City, who are on a terrible run of form under new manager Ruud van Nistelrooy, being 1-0 up as well, Spurs going into half time to then, within about 5-6 minutes of the restart, being in the losing position. I mean, it's going so bad for Spurs, laughably bad. 15th in the table. And look, as a Manchester United fan, I've got to thank you, Spurs, because you're making our position in the table not look as disastrous. So I appreciate it. In fact, I would love to get you a late Christmas present. And maybe it would be a feather duster to just clean up that empty space in the trophy cabinet where you can put the automatic promotion trophy you get for finishing second in the Championship next year. So, cheers, lads. Honestly, it means a lot. And even if you bring injuries into it, you'd still take that Spurs team over that Leicester team. You just would. But we're going to go over the attacking phase of Spurs first and see where it kind of went right and wrong. Spurs would be in the same shape they're always in, which is the 2-3-2-3 with the fullbacks inverting alongside the single pivot in Bentancur. Sarr and Bergvall high up in the 8th with Kulusevski and Son flanking Richarlison. Leicester initially from goal kicks would go man-to-man, full press. They would drop off very quickly though when Spurs had a couple touches on the ball. I thought the one thing they excelled at brilliantly in the second half was they maintained their press a lot more and they were being a lot more aggressive in getting after Spurs and winning the ball back high. And if anything, that was actually the reason for their second goal, the winning goal, was their pressing in these areas as the ball tried to go around the outside into Bentancur. Samare, who I thought was excellent in that second half, full of energy, full of aggression and winning the ball back, covering the midfield area well and winning the ball off of Bentancur, playing into El Khanous, who then was able to capitalise on the defensive line dropping, a lovely finish in at the left-hand side of the goal, and Leicester get their winner. But in the first half, they dropped off far too easily. In the second half, they didn't make that mistake. They maintained a level of aggression and made it hard for Spurs to play out. And Spurs were forced direct quite a lot from either Kinski, he'd play it to the centre-backs if they couldn't progress, go back to him, and he'd usually try and knock it long to either Son or Kulusevski. The issue is they don't have great pace to make the most of those situations. Maybe you'd knock it long for Richarlison to try and win his physical battles. But to no avail, you'd be left with phase a lot more because Vestergaard would look to go and engage Bergvall in the high 8 position. So the direct option wasn't the best. The only thing that they could profit off of is hopefully someone gambling on a second ball or the header from Leicester or them winning the ball in these 50-50s would result in a free kick or a throw-in. And they could sort of restart a more aggressive attacking phase from there. But other than that, the direct option wasn't working. Where they did get a bit of success in the first half was through build-up, and that would be with Leicester quickly dropping off into a 4-4-2, which was very flat. It would be more about sort of managing space and doing it a bit zonally. Midfield four sort of trying to cover the central attacking midfielders for Spurs and the fullbacks, who obviously we know how they like to position themselves in line with that midfield too. El Khanous, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, El Khanous. I sometimes listen to the games with that commentary, so I may be getting his name wrong. But him and Vardy blocking off the pass into Bentancur. The only issue is that they didn't recover well when the passes bypassed them. So with Dragusin and Ben Davies getting time on the ball, they could play it to Porro or to Archie Gray on this side, who could then look to play inside with that attacking midfield four, pushing the midfield four line of Leicester a little bit deeper, and could play that horizontal pass across to Bentancur with El Khanous and Vardy struggling to react efficiently to cover him. And then he could look to play forward, could shrug off the challenges even if they did try and back press, and look to try and play it in between the horizontal lines of the Leicester shape. And this would also cause one of the midfielders to jump, again creating more space in those pockets. But if they couldn't play into that area, they'd then look to maybe play into the wider areas. So let's say if Archie Gray getting on the ball here or Pedro Porro here, they could look to play it around to Kulusevski, who would look to drop in a little bit deeper to receive the ball. This would bring Christensen up with him, Justin if it was on the other side. And then you'd look to get Bergvall or Sarr attacking the space in between centre-back and full-back. But the likes of De Cordova and Samari had to be really switched on in covering these areas and just protect that channel run just in case that ball got fired in from Porro and deep or Kulusevski in this area. But the issue is with that, is with those movements of these two, it left the fullback in a little bit of space. And this is where Pedro Porro got the time to put in a fantastic cross into Richarlison at the far post, who headed in to make it 1-0. He just had that time afforded to him with those more attacking movements of those dragging markers away and creating space in deeper areas. It still takes exceptional quality to pull that off. And to be fair to Porro, he has it. And brilliant from him and a brilliant header from Richarlison. If they couldn't play through down that area, then they could look to maybe move inside into the central areas with the Leicester shape being pulled across. If I just quickly do that now. And the joy of having Kulusevski in the wide area was that he could pull inside and look to switch the play to the opposite side, or Bergvall could, or Bentancur could, if they got space in this area, playing it to Son. He would have a lot of space with Justin's narrow positioning. He would also get a lot more space with Justin getting pulled in even more narrow by Sarr making really smart movements in between himself and Wout Faes that could pull Justin in, cause him to be distracted. Again, just grants on a lot more time on this left-hand side to create and attack and get into the byline where he could look to get a cross in. He'd be supported by Archie Gray as well, who could overlap or underlap on this side and pull a marker away if James Justin recovered and Leicester recovered into the box. Their crossing was really poor though at points, and they weren't as effective when they got into these areas. And with trying to play through the width without having the pace to go direct from the back and then having the crossing ability except for Pedro Porro to make up for it, once Leicester got in shape on the edge of the box, they were able to soak up the pressure and feel like they lacked a little bit of the midfield quality without Kulusevski being central, with no Maddison to open him up. I also feel like with Sarr making that run, he's not the player you want receiving the ball from deep in those areas. I think a lack of Son not having that pace he once had and being as direct with his movement in between fullback and centre-back, a Doggy not being in the team who does make those inverted runs, and that lack of threat means that Leicester can recover into position well, and it meant that the Spurs could become a bit toothless. And it just meant that when Leicester did drop in, they could drop in deep and narrow. And when I say deep, I mean really deep. El Khanous and Vardy were very, very compact with the distances between themselves and their defensive line. And with that lack of technical quality in the midfield, Kulusevski pushed a little bit too out wide at points with the lack of Maddison in the team. It just meant that they didn't have the real quality to open Leicester up. And this is where injuries can play its part, because the lack of quality is obviously going to hurt them. The lack of pace in the team as well. And as a result, it just made him a little bit easier to react to from a Leicester point of view. So that's where you can give Ange Postecoglou a little bit of a let-off, just because those injuries, I think, will harm the attacking side of things more than the defensive side. I feel like if you have injuries to your defensive side, you can always set up to stop yourself conceding pressure. When you're missing the attacking quality that's so intentional to the way you play, that is going to harm you, I think, and so I'll be fair on that. The lack of pace and technical quality really did hurt them in this game, but when they would lose the ball, Leicester could spring from these deeper areas to counter-attack with the way that Spurs would look to push bodies up the pitch, and Leicester would invite that with their deeper shape. Vardy did a really good job of running the channels and counter-attacking opportunities, getting on the ball, holding it up, looking for the forward runs of the three in behind, Ayew, El Khanous and Decordova-Reid for support, and they could hopefully get attacks off in that way. And Vardy, it doesn't have the pace he once had, but his channel running is superb. And he was a threat to those centre-backs in transition a lot. So full credit to him, still doing it at the ripe young age of 38. But he's a special player, Vardy, one we've been lucky to have in the Premier League for a number of years. But how did Leicester attack the game in their way? Leicester would look to originally build up in a 2-4-3-1, very narrow onto the one side generally, as they look to build up through the left, with Winks and Samari in between the two fullbacks, Ayew, El Khanous and Decordova-Reid very narrow with Vardy as the striker. Spurs would look to start off in pressing zonally, but pressing high and aggressively. Richarlison would press the centre-backs, generally moving over to Wout Faes or Vestergaard, depending on where the direction of the pass was going. Son would look to press from full-back onto the wide centre-back remaining, as Kulusevski would on the far side, with Sarr and Bergvall pushing onto the pivots, Bentancur looking after El Khanous, and Archie Gray and Pedro Porro remaining narrow to look for the wingers. And this is where Leicester could get their success, really, would be through playing over the winger press of Tottenham. So let's just say if Richarlison was in a position where Kulusevski got dragged in to Vestergaard, that pass could go to Christensen, The biggest problem is with this, Kulusevski did recover really well and getting back onto Christensen and pressing him and winning the ball back. Christensen also doesn't have amazing ball control and breakaway pace to get away in this area. And it always felt like Leicester's build-up shape was pressed more towards the left. And so there wasn't always as much space there because they were very congested onto that side of the pitch. So they'd have to recycle it back round if they didn't lose the ball back to the defence or back to the goalkeeper and look to play over to the right, especially if Son came in from James Justin to Wout Faes. That pass could then find its way to James Justin, who was a lot freer. And because Son was pulled in a lot more narrow because of the play being on the left-hand side, he couldn't get over to James Justin quick enough, even if he hadn't have gone to press Wout Faes. So he was easily bypassed. It's a bit sad to see because you are seeing a decline in Son, to be fair. He doesn't have the legs to be a full pressing machine anymore. Doesn't obviously have that counter-attacking threat with his pace. It's becoming a little bit painful to see. I think we're starting to realise how much of his game was modelled around his pace. I mean, we always knew it anyway, but sometimes it hits you when you're seeing him without that quality. A little bit like we've seen with Kyle Walker this season. You know, you always respected he was a world-class player, but he was so good you almost thought he was complete. And I think there's a difference between having a world-class quality and being complete, and sometimes it cons you. So James Justin could move forward again. Archie Gray could potentially be pinned back by Ayew's positioning with him remaining narrow, so Justin could attack on this right-hand side. Or Jordan Ayew could make that run into the channel, allowing James Justin to move inside. Would then have to be wary of the threat of Ben Davies, but Vardy would be making good vertical movements, so would El Khanous, who couldn't really receive the ball from these areas because of Bentancur's marking of him, Deco-Reed as well, if they look to play inside. And Spurs didn't transition defensively well enough at all to get back in. And so they could fashion the odd chance out through the little interplay between these two on this side in Jordan Ayew and James Justin. And to be fair, while that was the threat in the first half, it was where the first goal, the equaliser, came from in the first half, with Christensen getting away from Kulusevski, Porro making a rash decision, coming up into pressing into the more advanced areas of Kulusevski getting drawn into Vestergaard, Deco-Reed coming up as well, and Christensen being able to run forward and set the attack off that resulted in the equaliser goal. So the fullbacks were the danger really for Leicester in both these sort of more direct attacking threats and getting up the pitch quickly. And both showed real good signs of efficiency, to be fair to him. El Khanous did get a little bit more joy in the second half. He was showing a lot more fluidity to receive the ball, maybe out wide, interchanging with the likes of Ayew and Deco-Reed in these areas to be a bit more fluid and confuse, I guess, Bentancur and the defensive players marking by pulling off to areas they wouldn't like to engage. And he could use his movement as well to give and go with certain players, if it's Ayew or James Justin or whoever, and receive it in the box, or use his quality out wide to find the direct runs of the defensive players in behind the Spurs defensive line. Vardy as well, showing great quality and getting in behind. So he was a threat throughout. His goal was fantastic. And it just shows why Spurs paid special attention to him, because once he got a bit of freedom in the second half, he was causing a lot of trouble. He's been a very sort of understated player in the Premier League this season, but really showing why Van Nistelrooy has a lot of faith in him. And again, the Spurs defence's reaction to this is sort of what resulted in the winning goal, is that they do drop off. They don't look to go and engage. They're not aggressive centre-backs. And once that press is beaten, they're retreating. They're not wanting to deal with any runners one-on-one and get into a more defensive state. The Spurs midfield doesn't recover in well enough at all. So there becomes a lot of space in between. And Ange isn't willing to adopt a different approach. He's not willing to drop off 5-10 yards in his press, despite the fact that the Spurs not having the players available to maybe pull it off to the top level, especially in defence. And you could argue that high intensity style of play is probably resulting in the injuries they do have, especially in the midfield and centre back areas. Definitely the centre back areas. We saw that in the Chelsea game a few months ago. So it's his failure to adapt that I think is really going to cost him. And as much as I've been saying that it's the League Cup semi-final that's keeping him in the job potentially, the results in the league are getting so bad that it almost becomes irrelevant. So I think he still holds on to his job till at least that League Cup semi-final. But, I mean, you can't lose at home to Leicester, man. That's a big, big big loss, a really bad one. And it wouldn't shock me if some news comes out this week. And look, we know Daniel Levy can sack a manager before a big cup game. We've seen it happen before with managers that had Spurs in better positions than what they are now. So we'll wait and see. But I'd love to know what you guys think, so don't just take my word for it. Like the video if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it, comment down below, tell me why either way, and subscribe if you want to see more. In a bit, lads.